everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Avon Van Hassel. I'm a self-published author, and I'm here every Wednesday to give you tips and tricks for things to try in your writing. Now, this is part 2 of a 5-part series on character development and character building. If you didn't see part 1, I'll put it in the eye. And if you would like to see the rest of these videos when they come out, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so that you will be notified when I post those. But we'll have one next week, and then I'm planning on skipping a week because I'm going to make a video about The Sims if it kills me, and it might. So then the week after that should be, the 2 weeks after that should be the last 2 videos. Yes. If not, then I'll just post 5 in a row until I figure out this Sims nonsense. But anyway, subscribe and hit the bell so that you'll be notified when I post those videos. Now, as I mentioned in the last video in part 1, which was about naming, in a beginning writer's workshop that I hosted with a friend of mine last year, this video series and the video series I did on world building were actually pretty popular, and people said that I had brought up a couple of points that they hadn't considered. That's why I wanted to bring them over to YouTube. You okay? Need a minute? She's fine. And I'm hoping that some of these things can help you guys too. Now, like I said in the last one, if I do run another workshop, they will be more in depth than what I'm putting here on YouTube, but I thought these were so good overall points just to consider when you are building characters or building a world. So this week, week 2, part 2, the topic is personality. Last week we did naming. This week is personality, and don't worry, those aren't the only 2 things about characters. There's a lot more to go into when you're creating a character, because characters are, of course, the drivers of the plot. So there's a lot to consider when you're building characters. So this week we're going to talk about personality. So the first point is character traits. These are aspects of somebody's personality, positive and negative, and sometimes neutral, that will affect their actions going forward. So these are things like, these are very broad, open-ended things like, are they blunt? Are they diplomatic? Are they friendly? Are they surly? Are they good at mechanics? Like, these are, well, maybe not good at mechanics because we're going to go into skills in a second. These are just broad personality traits. Like when you describe someone, who they are as a person, what do you think of, right? So if I were to describe my characters, I would say that Alois is emotional. He is impetuous and impulsive, but he's also very affectionate and open and friendly, that sort of thing. Whereas Sulat tends to be blunt and straightforward. She's also super efficient and logical, but she tends to be a little emotional, but on the angry side, as opposed to on the more crying side. If I were to describe my cat, I would say she's a scaredy cat, but she also is very affectionate, and she is perhaps not the brightest bulb, but she does have a lot of street smarts, and she is very, she's suspicious of a lot of things, and I kind of like that about her. So these traits are not inherently good or bad because they contribute to a character in different ways. So if you're somebody like me, you might find someone who is blunt to be either honest or an asshole, like depending on the context. So these traits aren't necessarily inherently good or bad, but in context they can go either way. So these are personality traits that you're going to explore in your characters. Likes and dislikes. What do they like? What do they not like? What do they not give a shit about? So going back to my cat, she likes catnip, which only about 50% of cats like catnip, so I know that sounds like duh, but it's not. She also really likes Minnie Mouse. It's a really weird, like, it's a thing. Like, she will seek out Minnie Mouse. It's the strangest thing. She also loves rectangles. She does not like doors. She doesn't care for being touched by most people but me. She actually doesn't like most food. She's very suspicious of food, which is very strange, but these are personality traits that are different from other cats that I've had, so that's why I'm mentioning them, because they do stand out. So maybe your characters like Coke, but they don't like Sprite. These sorts of things you don't have to go through like every single thing in life, but you should have a decent list of sort of situations that might come up, right? So you don't need like which roller coasters are their favorite if they're not going to go to a roller coaster theme park or that sort of thing. Like, and you don't need to just stick to plot specific things. You should know a lot of obscure things about your characters, but you can kind of decide how in depth to go with that sort of thing. For instance, Joanna likes chocolate and tea, but she does not like coffee. It's one of those, that level of thing that you can kind of pepper in about a character. Now we're getting into skills. What are they good at? What are they not good at? And these are things, again, it's like likes and dislikes. You can decide what's going to come into the plot and what isn't. But it's all kind of relevant for building character. You need to know more about your character than you're ever going to tell people. And sometimes you can have character or skills that are similar but different. For instance, if we look at Alois and Sulat, they're both good at reading a situation. It's part of their job. Alois... I just threw my earrings all over the floor. Alois is very good at reading people. So he's good at navigating conversations and negotiations and interrogations and those sorts of things. He's very much a people-oriented person, but he might not necessarily... He's good at faces, but he might not necessarily notice what they're doing with their hands or their feet. He might not necessarily be clued into what's going on in the rest of the room, which is where Sulat comes in, because she cannot read faces for shit. She has no idea what you're doing with your face. Like, she can't tell the difference between a smile and a grimace. But she notices hands, because she's a thief. She notices feet, because she has a thing about shoes. And she's very good at reading the surroundings and situations. So she lets Alois get along with whatever he's doing, and she kind of keeps an eye on what's going on around them. And that gets them out of a lot of scrapes. Other characters, for instance, Joanna's also good at navigating social environments, but she'd be useless in a fight. So these are the sort of things. And when I get into later, when I talk about character sheets in a sort of a D&D context for these characters, we'll get into that a bit about like the stats, like dexterity versus charisma versus wisdom versus etc., and where you put all your skill points. And there are different ways for different character strengths to get them out of the same jam. So for instance, if Joanna were to find herself in a fight, her first impulse would be to de-escalate the conflict. She would start talking, whereas Alois and Sulat would just jump into combat. So you could have a situation where different characters would handle it differently based on their strengths. So that's why it matters. Next, I want to talk about more esoteric ways of stratifying and categorizing your characters, like for instance the MBTI or astrology or enneagrams or those sorts of things. The MBTI stands for the Myers-Briggs Type Index, which is 16 personality types related to how you navigate your world and environment and make decisions and that sort of thing. For instance, I'm an INFJ, which means introverted, intuitive, feeling, and judging, which is that I'm introverted. We all know what that means now. Intuitive means I tend to look at a big picture. Feeling is I tend to make decisions emotionally, and judging is I tend to stick with my decisions and I don't waffle very much. That's very, very broad and very, very basic, but that's in a nutshell. I do run an MBTI test for literally all of my characters, even background characters, because it helps me to figure out how they would interact with each other in a given situation. So I do recommend running your characters through something like that, like an Enneagram, or even figuring out their zodiac sign, just to kind of flesh it out just a little bit more. And the last thing I want to talk about is function. So what purpose does this character have in your story? What role do they play? How does the situation change just by them being there? What effect do they have on their environment and the other characters and the situation? Why does one character, being who they are, need to be in a scene over a different character? So, for instance, Joanna originally started off as my love interest, but she has evolved into a character in her own right who has her own agency and her own skills and abilities, her own traits, etc., that affects her life independently of Alois's life. She was never a rival to Sulat, because Sulat is more or less a work relationship and a platonic relationship, so they don't work in opposition. But there are scenes where it is appropriate for Joanna to be there in her function as a love interest, where Sulat would not be appropriate. And, or Rosabelle, who is a child, etc. So there are certain traits that correspond to a function. So, for instance, Sulat as the work partner or as the platonic friendship would need to have, from a mechanics perspective, this doesn't apply to real life people. From a mechanics standpoint, she needs to have certain traits that either complement Alois or in opposition to Alois's personality traits, because there either needs to be conflict, because there are conflicts in relationships, or they need to work together and kind of fill in each other's deficiencies. Or their traits need to be compatible and work together. So she needs to have certain traits that make her a good partner, whereas Joanna needs to have traits that make her a good love interest, and they will be different traits, obviously. So those are some things to consider. I know I was talking really fast in this one. I think it's because I just had a cup of coffee, but I hope it helped. I hope I was able to give you some good ideas. If you know somebody who is struggling with character building, or they're starting out on their path, be sure to share this video with them, and hopefully it will help them with some of the questions they're having. This actually might not actually be a terrible idea for just like gaming groups, if you guys need help building characters and such. Like I said at the beginning, be sure to hit the bell and subscribe so that you know when I post the other videos, and be sure to check out part 1 and also my other videos. And I am gonna go chill, and I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.